The Signalman by Charles Dickens.
Hello! Below there!
When he heard a voice thus calling to him, he was standing at the door of his box with a flag in his hand, furled round its short pole. One would have thought, considering the nature of the ground, that he could not have doubted from what quarter the voice came, but instead of looking up to where I stood on the top of the steep cutting, nearly over his head, he turned himself about and looked down the line. There was something remarkable in his manner of doing this, though I could not have said for my life what. But I know it was remarkable enough to attract my notice, even though his figure was foreshortened and shadowed down in the deep trench, and mine was high above, so steeped in the glow of an angry sunset that I had shaded my eyes with my hand before I saw him at all.
Hello! Below!
From looking down the line, he turned himself about again, and, raising his eyes, saw my figure high above him.
Is there any path by which I can come down and speak to you?
He looked up at me without replying, and I looked down at him without pressing him too soon with a repetition of my idle question. Just then there came a vague vibration in the earth and air, quickly changing into a violent pulsation, and an oncoming rush that caused me to start back, as though it had force to draw me down. When such vapour as rose to my height from this rapid train had passed me and was skimming away over the landscape, I looked down again, and saw him refurling the flag he had shown while the train went by. I repeated my inquiry. After a pause, during which he seemed to regard me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point on my level some 200 or 300 yards distant. I called down to him,
"All right,"
and made for that point. There, by dint of looking closely about me, I found a rough, zigzag, descending path notched out, which I followed. The cutting was extremely deep and unusually precipitate. It was made through a clammy stone that became oozier and wetter as I went down. For these reasons I found the way long enough to give me time to recall a singular air of reluctance or compulsion with which he had pointed out the path. When I came down low enough upon the zigzag descent to see him again, I saw that he was standing between the rails on the way by which the train had lately passed, in an attitude as if he were waiting for me to appear. He had his left hand at his chin, and that left elbow rested on his right hand crossed over his breast. His attitude was one of such expectation and watchfulness that I stopped a moment, wondering at it. I resumed my downward way, and stepping out upon the level of the railroad and drawing nearer to him, saw that he was a dark, sallow man, with a dark beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. On either side a dripping wet wall of jagged stone, excluding all view but a strip of sky. The perspective one way only a crooked prolongation of this great dungeon, the shorter perspective in the other direction terminating in a gloomy red light, and the gloomier entrance to a black tunnel, in whose massive architecture there was a barbarous, depressing, and forbidding air. So little sunlight ever found its way to this spot that it had an earthy, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it that it struck chill to me, as if I had left the natural world. Before he stirred, I was near enough to him to have touched him. Not even then, removing his eyes from mine, he stepped back one step and lifted his hand. This was a lonesome post to occupy, I said, and it had riveted my attention when I looked down from up yonder. A visitor was a rarity, I should suppose. Not an unwelcome rarity, I hoped. In me, he merely saw a man who had been shut up within narrow limits all his life, and who, being at last set free, had a newly awakened interest in these great works. To such purpose I spoke to him. But I am far from sure of the terms I used, for besides that I am not happy in opening any conversation, there was something in the man that daunted me. He directed a most curious look towards the red light near the tunnel's mouth, and looked all about it, as if something were missing from it, and then looked at me. That light was part of his charge, was it not? He answered in a low voice, "Don't you know it is?" The monstrous thought came into my mind as I perused the fixed eyes and the saturnine face, that this was a spirit, not a man, I have speculated since whether there may have been infection in his mind. In my turn, I stepped back, but in making the action I detected in his eyes some latent fear of me. This put the monstrous thought to flight. You look at me," I said, forcing a smile, "as if you had a dread of me." "I was doubtful," he returned, "whether I had seen you before." Where?" He pointed to the red light he had looked at. "There?" I said. Intently watchful of me, he replied, but without sound, "Yes." "My good fellow, what should I do there?" "However, be that as it may, I never was there, you may swear." "I think I may," he rejoined. "Yes, I'm sure I may." His manner cleared, like my own. He replied to my remarks with readiness, and in well-chosen words. Had he much to do there? Yes. That was to say, he had enough responsibility to bear, but exactness and watchfulness were what was required of him, and of actual work, manual labour, he had next to none. To change that signal, to trim those lights, and to turn this iron handle now and then, was all he had to do under that head. Regarding those many long and lonely hours of which I seemed to make so much, he could only say that the routine of his life had shaped itself into that form, and he had grown used to it. He had taught himself a language down here, if only to know it by sight, and to have formed his own crude ideas of its pronunciation could be called learning it. He had also worked at fractions and decimals, and tried a little algebra, but he was, and had been as a boy, a poor hand at figures. Was it necessary for him, when on duty, always to remain in that channel of damp air? And could he never rise into the sunshine from between those high stone walls? Why, that depended upon times and circumstances. Under some conditions there would be less upon the line than under others, and the same held good as to certain hours of the day and night. In bright weather he did choose occasions for getting a little above these lower shadows, but being at all times liable to be called by his electric bell, and at such times listening for it with redoubled anxiety, the relief was less than I would suppose. He took me into his box, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book in which he had to make certain entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial face and needles, and the little bell of which he had spoken. On my trusting that he would excuse the remark, that he had been well educated, and, I hoped I might say without offence, perhaps educated above that station, he observed that instances of slight incongruity in such wise would rarely be found wanting among large bodies of men, that he had heard it was so in workhouses, in the police force, even in that last desperate resource, the army, and that he knew it was so, more or less, in any great railway staff. He had been, when young, if I could believe it, sitting in that hut, he scarcely could, a student of natural philosophy, and had attended lectures. But he had run wild, misused his opportunities, gone down, and never risen again. He had no complaint to offer about that. He had made his bed, and he lay upon it. It was far too late to make another. All that I have here condensed he said in a quiet manner, with his grave dark regards divided between me and the fire. He threw in the word "sir" from time to time, and especially when he referred to his youth, as though to request me to understand that he claimed to be nothing but what I found him. He was several times interrupted by the little bell, and had to read off messages and send replies. Once he had to stand without the door, and display a flag as a train passed and make some verbal communication to the driver. In the discharge of his duties I observed him to be remarkably exact and vigilant, breaking off his discourse at a syllable, and remaining silent until what he had to do was done. In a word, I should have set this man down as one of the safest of men to be employed in that capacity, but for the circumstance that while he was speaking to me, he twice broke off with a fallen colour, turned his face towards the little bell, when it did not ring, opened the door of the hut, which was kept shut to exclude the unhealthy damp, and looked out towards the red light near the mouth of the tunnel. On both of those occasions he came back to the fire with the inexplicable air upon him which I had remarked without being able to define, when we were so far asunder. Said I, when I rose to leave him, "You almost make me think that I have met with a contented man." I am afraid I must acknowledge that I said it to lead him on. "I believe I used to be so," he rejoined in the low voice in which he had first spoken. "But I am troubled, sir. I am troubled." He would have recalled the words if he could. He had said them, however, and I took them up quickly. "With what? What is your trouble?" "It is very difficult to impart, sir. It is very, very difficult to speak of. If ever you make me another visit, I will try to tell you." "Oh, but I expressly intend to make you another visit. Say, when shall it be?" "I go off early in the morning, and I shall be on again at 10 tomorrow night, sir." "I will come at 11. He thanked me and went out at the door with me. "I'll show my white light, sir," he said in his peculiar low voice, "till you have found the way up. When you have found it, don't call out. And when you are at the top, don't call out." His manner seemed to make the place strike colder to me, but I said no more than, "Very well." "And when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out." "Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry, 'Hello, below there,' tonight?" "Well, heaven knows," said I. "I cried something to that effect." "Not to that effect, sir. Those were the very words. I know them well." "Admit those were the very words. I said them, no doubt, because I saw you below." "For no other reason?" "What other reason could I possibly have?" "You have no feeling that they were conveyed to you in any supernatural way?" "No." He wished me good night and held up his light. I walked by the side of the down line of rails with a very disagreeable sensation of a train coming behind me until I found the path. It was easier to mount than to descend, and I got back to my inn without any adventure. Punctual to my appointment, I placed my foot on the first notch of the zigzag next night as the distant clocks were striking 11. He was waiting for me at the bottom with his white light on. "I have not called out," I said, when we came close together. "May I speak now?" "Oh, by all means, sir." "Good night, then, and here's my hand." "Good night, sir, and here's mine." With that, we walked side by side to his box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by the fire. "I have made up my mind, sir," he began, bending forward as soon as we were seated, and speaking in a tone but a little above a whisper, "that you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else yesterday evening. That troubles me." "That mistake?" "No, that's someone else." "Well, who is it?" "I don't know." "Like me?" "I don't know. I never saw the face. The left arm is across the face, and the right arm is waved, violently waved, this way." I followed his action with my eyes, and it was the action of an arm, gesticulating with the utmost passion and vehemence. "For God's sake, clear the way." "One moonlight night," said the man, "I was sitting here when I heard a voice cry, 'Hello, below there!' I started up, looked from that door, and saw this someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving, as I just now showed you. The voice seemed hoarse with shouting, and it cried, 'Look out! Look out!' And then again, 'Hello, below there! Look out!' I caught up my lamp, turned it on, and ran towards the figure, calling, 'What's wrong? What has happened? Where?' It stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I advanced so close upon it that I wondered at its keeping the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right up at it and had my hand stretched out to pull the sleeve away, when it was gone." "Into the tunnel?" said I. "No. I ran on into the tunnel 500 yards. I stopped and held my lamp above my head and saw the figures of the measured distance, and saw the wet stains stealing down from the walls and trickling through the arch. I ran out again, faster than I'd run in, for I had a mortal abhorrence of the place upon me. And I looked all round the red light with my own red light, and I went up the iron ladder to the gallery atop of it, and I came down again and ran back here. I telegraphed both ways. An alarm has been given. Is anything wrong? The answer came back both ways. All well. Resisting the slow touch of a frozen finger tracing out my spine, I showed him how that this figure must be a deception of his sense of sight, and how that figures originating in disease of the delicate nerves that minister to the functions of the eye were known to have often troubled patients, some of whom had become conscious of the nature of their affliction, and had even proved it by experiments upon themselves. As to the imaginary cry, said I, do but listen for a moment to the wind in this unnatural valley while we speak so low, and to the wild harp it makes of the telegraph wires. Well, all this was very well, he returned, after we had sat listening for a while, and he ought to know something of the wind and the wires, he who so often passed long winter nights there alone and watching, but he would beg to remark that he had not finished. I asked his pardon, and he slowly added these words, touching my arm. Within 6 hours after the appearance, the memorable accident on this line happened, and within 10 hours the dead and wounded were brought along through the tunnel over the spot where the figure had stood. A disagreeable shudder crept over me, but I did my best against it. It was not to be denied, I rejoined, that this was a remarkable coincidence, calculated deeply to impress his mind. But it was unquestionable that remarkable coincidences did continually occur, and they must be taken into account in dealing with such a subject. Though, to be sure, I must admit, I added, for I thought I saw that he was going to bring the objection to bear upon me, men of common sense did not allow much for coincidences in making the ordinary calculations of life. He again begged to remark that he had not finished. I again begged his pardon for being betrayed into interruptions. This, he said, again laying his hand upon my arm and glancing over his shoulder with hollow eyes, was just a year ago. 6 or 7 months passed, and I had recovered from the surprise and shock when, one morning, as the day was breaking, I, standing at that door, looked towards the red light and saw the spectre again. He stopped with a fixed look at me. Did it cry out? No, it was silent. Did it wave its arm? No, it leaned against the shaft of the light with both hands before the face, like this. Once more I followed his action with my eyes. It was an action of mourning. I have seen such an attitude in stone figures on tombs. Did you go up to it? I came in and sat down, partly to collect my thoughts, partly because it had turned me faint. When I went to the door again, daylight was above me, and the ghost was gone. But nothing followed, nothing came of this. He touched me on the arm with his forefinger twice or thrice, giving a ghastly nod each time. That very day, as a train came out of the tunnel, I noticed at a carriage window on my side what looked like a confusion of hands and heads, and something waved. I saw it just in time to signal the driver, "Stop." He shut off and put his brake on, but the train drifted past here 150 yards or more. I ran after it, and as I went along heard terrible screams and cries. A beautiful young lady had died instantaneously in one of the compartments, and was brought in here and laid down on this floor between us. Involuntarily I pushed my chair back as I looked from the boards at which he pointed to himself. True, sir, true. Precisely as it happened, so I tell it you. I could think of nothing to say to any purpose, and my mouth was very dry. The wind and the wires took up the story with a long lamenting wail. He resumed, "Now, sir, mark this, and judge how my mind is troubled. The spectre came back a week ago. Ever since it has been there now and again by fits and starts. At the light? At the danger light. Now, what does it seem to do? He repeated, if possible with increased passion and vehemence, that former gesticulation of, "For God's sake, clear the way." Then he went on. "I have no peace or rest for it. It calls to me for many minutes together in an agonized manner. 'Below there, look out, look out!' It stands waving to me. 'It rings my little bell.'" I caught at that. "Did it ring your bell yesterday evening when I was here and you went to the door?" "Twice." "Why, see," said I, "how your imagination misleads you. My eyes were on the bell, and my ears were open to the bell, and if I'm a living man, it did not ring at those times. No, nor at any other time, except when it has rung in the natural course of physical things by the station communicating with you." He shook his head. "I've never made a mistake as to that yet, sir. I have never confused the spectre's ring with the man's. The ghost's ring is a strange vibration in the bell that it derives from nothing else, and I have not asserted that the bell stirs to the eye. I don't wonder that you failed to hear it. But I heard it." "And did the spectre seem to be there when you looked out?" "It was there." "Both times?" He repeated firmly. "Both times." "Will you come to the door with me and look for it now?" He bit his underlip, as though he was somewhat unwilling, but arose. I opened the door and stood on the step, while he stood in the doorway. There was the danger light. There was the dismal mouth of the tunnel. There were the high, wet stone walls of the cutting. There were the stars above them. "Do you see it?" I asked him, taking particular note of his face. His eyes were prominent and strained, but not very much more so, perhaps, than my own had been when I had directed them earnestly towards the same spot. "No," he answered. "It is not there." "Agreed," said I. We went in again, shut the door, and resumed our seats. I was thinking how best to improve this advantage, if it might be called one, when he took up the conversation in such a matter-of-course way, so assuming that there could be no serious question of fact between us, that I felt myself in the weakest of positions. "By this time you will fully understand, sir," he said, "that what troubles me so dreadfully is the question, what does the spectre mean?" I was not sure, I told him, that I did fully understand. "What is its warning against?" he said, ruminating, with his eyes on the fire, and only by times turning them on me. "What is the danger? Where is the danger? There is danger overhanging somewhere on the line. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It is not to be doubted this third time after what has gone before. But surely this is a cruel haunting of me. What can I do?" He pulled out his handkerchief and wiped the drops from his heated forehead. "If I telegraph danger on either side of me, or on both, I can give no reason for it," he went on, wiping the palms of his hands. "I should get into trouble and do no good. They would think I was mad. This is the way it would work. Message: danger, take care. Answer: what danger? Where? Message: don't know, but for God's sake take care. They would displace me. What else could they do?" His pain of mind was most pitiable to see. It was the mental torture of a conscientious man, oppressed beyond endurance by an unintelligible responsibility involving life. "When it first stood under the danger light," he went on, putting his dark hair back from his head and drawing his hands outward across and across his temples in an extremity of feverish distress, "why not tell me where that accident was to happen, if it must happen? Why not tell me how it could be averted, if it could have been averted? Or when on its second coming it hid its face, why not tell me instead she is going to die? Let them keep her at home. If it came on those 2 occasions only to show me that its warnings were true, and so to prepare me for the third, why not warn me plainly now? And I, Lord help me, a mere poor signalman on this solitary station, why not go to somebody with credit to be believed and power to act?" When I saw him in this state, I saw that for the poor man's sake, as well as for the public safety, what I had to do for the time was to compose his mind. Therefore, setting aside all question of reality or unreality between us, I represented to him that whoever thoroughly discharged his duty must do well, and that at least it was his comfort that he understood his duty, though he did not understand these confounding appearances. In this effort I succeeded far better than in the attempt to reason him out of his conviction. He became calm. The occupations incidental to his post as the night advanced began to make larger demands on his attention, and I left him at 2 in the morning. I had offered to stay through the night, but he would not hear of it. That I more than once looked back at the red light as I ascended the pathway, that I did not like the red light, and that I should have slept but poorly if my bed had been under it, I see no reason to conceal. Nor did I like the 2 sequences of the accident and the dead girl. I see no reason to conceal that either. But what ran most in my thoughts was the consideration how ought I to act, having become the recipient of this disclosure. I had proved the man to be intelligent, vigilant, painstaking, and exact. But how long might he remain so in his state of mind? Though in a subordinate position, still he held a most important trust, and would I, for instance, like to stake my own life on the chances of his continuing to execute it with precision? Unable to overcome a feeling that there would be something treacherous in my communicating what he had told me to his superiors in the company, without first being plain with himself and proposing a middle course to him, I ultimately resolved to offer to accompany him, otherwise keeping his secret for the present, to the wisest medical practitioner we could hear of in those parts, and to take his opinion. A change in his time of duty would come round next night, he had apprised me, and he would be off an hour or 2 after sunrise, and on again soon after sunset. I had appointed to return accordingly. Next evening was a lovely evening, and I walked out early to enjoy it. The sun was not yet quite down when I traversed the field path near the top of the deep cutting. I would extend my walk for an hour, I said to myself, half an hour on and half an hour back, and it would then be time to go to my signalman's box. Before pursuing my stroll, I stepped to the brink and mechanically looked down from the point from which I had first seen him. I cannot describe the thrill that seized upon me when, close at the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man, with his left sleeve across his eyes, passionately waving his right arm. The nameless horror that oppressed me passed in a moment, for in a moment I saw that this appearance of a man was a man indeed, and that there was a little group of other men standing at a short distance, to whom he seemed to be rehearsing the gesture he made. The danger light was not yet lighted. Against its shaft, a little low hut, entirely new to me, had been made of some wooden supports and tarpaulin. It looked no bigger than a bed. With an irresistible sense that something was wrong, with a flashing, self-reproachful fear that fatal mischief had come of my leaving the man there and causing no one to be sent to overlook or correct what he did, I descended the notched path with all the speed I could make. "What is the matter?" I asked the men. "Signalman killed this morning, sir." "Not the man belonging to that box?" "Yes, sir." "Not the man I know." "Ah, you will recognize him, sir, if you knew him," said the man who spoke for the others, solemnly uncovering his own head and raising an end of the tarpaulin, "for his face is quite composed." "Oh! How did this happen? How did this happen?" I asked, turning from one to another as the hut closed in again. "He was cut down by an engine, sir. No man in England knew his work better, but somehow he was not clear of the outer rail. It was just at broad day. He had struck the light and had the lamp in his hand. As the engine came out of the tunnel, his back was towards her, and she cut him down. That man drove her, and was showing how it happened. Show the gentleman, Tom." The man, who wore a rough, dark dress, stepped back to his former place at the mouth of the tunnel. "Coming round the curve in the tunnel, sir," he said. "I saw him at the end, like as if I saw him down a perspective glass. There was no time to check speed, and I knew him to be very careful. As he didn't seem to take heed of the whistle, I shut it off when we were running down upon him, and called to him as loud as I could call." "What did you say?" "I said,
Below there! Look out! Look out! For God's sake, clear the way!" I started. It was a dreadful time, sir. I never left off calling to him. I put this arm before my eyes not to see, and I waved this arm to the last, but it was no use.
Without prolonging the narrative to dwell on any one of its curious circumstances more than on any other, I may, in closing it, point out the coincidence that the warning of the engine driver included not only the words which the unfortunate signalman had repeated to me as haunting him, but also the words which I myself, not he, had attached, and that only in my own mind, to the gesticulation he had imitated. The Dream Woman by Wilkie Collins. I had not been settled much more than 6 weeks in my country practice when I was sent to a neighbouring town to consult on a case of a very dangerous illness. Looking to hire a gig for my return home as cheaply as possible, I sought out an unpretentious inn. The one I found was dingy and quiet, with an old-fashioned sign that had evidently not been repainted for many years past. The landlord was not above making a small profit, and as soon as we came to terms, he rang the yard bell to order the gig. "Has Robert not come back from the errand?" he asked, appealing to the waiter who answered the bell. "No, sir, he hasn't." "Well, then, you must wake up Isaac." "Wake up Isaac?" I repeated. "That sounds rather odd. Do your ostlers go to bed in the daytime?" "This one does," said the landlord, smiling to himself in a rather strange way. "And dreams, too," added the waiter. "Never you mind about that," retorted his master. "You go and rouse Isaac up. The gentleman's waiting for his gig." "Stop a minute," I interposed. "I have rather a fancy for seeing this man before you wake him. I'm a doctor, and if this queer sleeping and dreaming of his comes from anything wrong in his brain, I may be able to tell you what to do with him." "I rather think you'll find his complaint past all doctoring, sir," said the landlord. "But if you'd like to see him, you're welcome, I'm sure." He led the way across a yard to the stables, opened one of the doors, and waiting outside himself told me to look in. I found myself in a 2-stall stable. In one of the stalls, an old man was lying asleep on a litter. I stooped and looked at him attentively. It was a withered, woebegone face. The hollow, wrinkled cheeks and the scanty, grizzled hair told their own tale of past sorrow or suffering. He was drawing his breath convulsively when I first looked at him, and in a moment more he began to talk in his sleep. "Oh, wake up," I heard him say. "Wake up there! Murder!" He moved one lean arm slowly till it rested over his throat, shuddered a little, and turned on the straw. Then the arm left his throat, the hand stretched itself out and clutched at the side towards which he had turned, as if he fancied himself to be grasping at the edge of something. "Light grey eyes," he murmured, "and a droop in the left eyelid. Flaxen hair with a gold-yellow streak in it. All right, mother. Fair white arms with a down on them. Little lady's hand with a reddish look under the fingernails. You she-devil! Where's the knife?" I saw him shudder on the straw. His withered face became distorted. and he threw up both his hands with a quick, hysterical gasp. They struck against the bottom of the manger under which he lay, and the blow awakened him. I had just time to slip through the door before his eyes were fully open and his senses his own again. "Do you know anything about this man's past life?" I said to the landlord. "Yes, sir. I know pretty well all about it," was the answer. "And an uncommon queer story it is. My, just look at him. Poor devil, he's so worn out with these restless nights he's dropped back into his sleep already." "Don't wake him," I said. "I'm in no hurry for the gig. Wait till the other man comes back from his errand. And in the meantime, suppose I have some lunch and a bottle of sherry, and suppose you come and help me to get through it, The heart of mine host, as I had anticipated, warmed to me over his own wine. He soon became communicative on the subject of the man asleep in the stable, and little by little I drew the whole story out of him. It seems that some years ago there lived in the suburbs of a large seaport town on the west coast of England a man of humble circumstances by the name of Isaac Scatchard. His means of subsistence were derived from any employment he could get as an ostler, and occasionally, when times went well with him, from temporary engagements in service as stable helper in private houses. Though a faithful, steady, and honest man, he got on badly in his calling. His ill luck was proverbial among his neighbours. He was always missing good opportunities by no fault of his own, and Unlucky Isaac was his nickname in his own neighbourhood. When he was out of service, he lived alone with his widowed mother, who contrived to provide for her simple wants by doing rough work for the tailors, and always managed to keep a decent home for her son to return to whenever his ill luck drove him out helpless into the world. One bleak autumn, when Isaac was getting on towards 40, and when he was, as usual, out of place through no fault of his own, he set forth from his mother's cottage on a long walk inland to a gentleman's seat, where he had heard that a stable helper was required. It wanted then but 2 days of his birthday, and Mrs. Scatchard, with her usual fondness, made him promise before he started that he would be back in time to keep that anniversary with her in as festive a way as their poor means would allow. It was easy for him to comply with this request, even supposing he slept a night each way on the road. He was to start from home on Monday morning, and whether he got the new place or not, he was to be back for his birthday dinner on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Arriving at his destination too late on the Monday night to make application for the stable helper's place, he slept at the village inn, and in good time on the Tuesday morning presented himself at the gentleman's house to fill the vacant situation. Here again his ill luck pursued him as inexorably as ever. His long walk had been in vain. Only the day before, the stable helper's place had been given to another man. Isaac accepted this new disappointment resignedly, and as a matter of course. He set forth on his homeward journey, and walked all day with only one stoppage for bread and cheese. Just as it was getting towards dark, the rain came on and the wind began to rise, and he found himself stopping at a lonely roadside inn for the night. At a little after 11, the house was closed, and Isaac went round with the landlord holding the candle while the doors and lower windows were being secured. He noticed with surprise the strength of the bolts, bars, and iron-sheathed shutters. "You see, we are rather lonely here," said the landlord. "We never had any attempts made to break in yet, but it's always as well to be on the safe side." It was 11:30 by the clock in the passage as they went upstairs to the bedroom, the window of which looked out onto the wood at the back of the house. "Oh, here's where you're to sleep," said the landlord. "You're the only lodger tonight, and I think you'll say my missus has done her best to make you comfortable." Isaac locked the door, set his candle on the chest of drawers, and wearily got ready for bed. The bleak autumn wind was still blowing, and Isaac resolved as he lay down to keep the candle alight until he began to grow sleepy, for there was something unendurably depressing in the bare idea of lying awake in the darkness, listening to the dismal, ceaseless moan of the wind in the wood. Sleep stole on him before he was aware of it. His eyes closed, and he fell off insensibly to rest, without having so much as thought of extinguishing the candle. In one moment he passed from a state of sleep to a state of wakefulness, his eyes wide open, his mental perceptions cleared on a sudden as if by a miracle. The candle had burnt down nearly to the last morsel of tallow, but the top of the unsnuffed wick had just fallen off, and the light in the little room was for the moment fair and full. Between the foot of the bed and the closed door there stood a woman with a knife in her hand, looking at him.
He was stricken with terror. The woman said not a word as they stared each other in the face, but she began to move slowly towards the left-hand side of the bed. She was a fair, fine woman, with yellowish flaxen hair and light grey eyes, with a droop in the left eyelid. Speechless, with no expression in her face, with no noise following her footfall, she came closer and closer, stopped, and slowly raised the knife. He laid his right arm over his throat to save it, but as he saw the knife coming down, threw his hand across the bed to the right side and jerked his body over that way, just as the knife descended on the mattress within an inch of his shoulder. His eyes fixed on her arm and hand as she slowly drew the knife out of the bed. A white, well-shaped arm, with a pretty down lying lightly over the fair skin. A delicate lady's hand with the crowning beauty of a pink flush under and round the fingernails. She drew the knife out and passed back again slowly to the foot of the bed, stopped there for a moment looking at him, then came on, still speechless, still with no expression on the beautiful face, still with no sound following the stealthy footfalls, came on to the right side of the bed where he now lay. As she approached, she raised the knife again, and he drew himself away to the left side. She struck, as before, right into the mattress, with a deliberate, perpendicularly downward action of the arm. This time his eyes wandered from her to the knife. It was like the large clasp knives, which he had often seen labouring men use to cut their bread and bacon with. Her delicate little fingers did not conceal more than 2/3 of the handle. He noticed that it was made of buckhorn, clean and shining as the blade was, and looking like new. For the second time she drew the knife out, concealed it in the wide sleeve of her gown, then stopped by the bedside, watching him. For an instant he saw her standing in that position. Then the wick of the spent candle fell over into the socket. The flame diminished to a little blue point, and the room grew dark. A moment, or less if possible, passed so, and then the wick flamed up smokily for the last time. His eyes were still looking eagerly over the right-hand side of the bed when the final flash of light came, but they discerned nothing. The fair woman with the knife was gone. With the dreadful conviction of what he had seen still strong within him, he leapt out of bed and, screaming, "Murder! Wake up there! Wake up!" dashed headlong through the darkness to the door. It was fast locked, exactly as he had left it on going to bed. His cries on starting up had alarmed the house. He heard the terrified, confused exclamations of women. He saw the master of the house approaching along the passage with his burning rush candle in one hand and his gun in the other. "What is it?" asked the landlord breathlessly. Isaac could only answer in a whisper. "A woman with a knife in her hand, in my room, a fair, yellow-haired woman. She jabbed at me with a knife twice over." The landlord looked at Isaac by the flickering light of his candle. "Well, she seems to have missed you twice," he said. "I dodged the knife as it came down," Isaac went on. "It struck the bed each time." The landlord took his candle into the bedroom. In less than a minute he came out again into the passage in a violent passion. "The devil fly away with you and your woman with the knife! There isn't a mark in the bedclothes anywhere! What do you mean by coming into a man's place and frightening his family out of their wits by a dream?" "I'll leave your house," said Isaac faintly. "Better out on the road in rain and dark on my way home than back again in that room after what I've seen in it. Lend me a light to get my clothes by, and tell me what I'm to pay." "Pay?" cried the landlord, leading the way with his light sulkily into the bedroom. "You'll find your score on the slate when you go downstairs. I wouldn't have taken you in for all the money you got about you if I'd known your dreaming, screeching ways beforehand. Look at the bed. Where's the cut of a knife in it? Look at the window. Is the lock bursted? Look at the door, which I heard you fasten yourself. Is it broke in? A murdering woman with a knife in my house. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." Isaac answered not a word. He huddled on his clothes, and then they went down the stairs together. "Nigh on 20 minutes past 2, said the landlord as they passed the clock. "A nice time in the morning to frighten honest people out of their wits." Isaac paid his bill, and the landlord let him out at the front door. The rain had ceased, but the night was dark and the wind bleaker than ever. Little did the darkness or the cold matter to Isaac. If he had been turned out into the wilderness in a thunderstorm,
It would have been a relief after what he had suffered in the bedroom of the inn. What was the fair woman with the knife? The creature of a dream? Or that other creature from the unknown world called among men by the name of ghost? He could make nothing of the mystery, had made nothing of it, even when it was midday on Wednesday and when he stood at last once more on the doorstep of home. His mother came out eagerly to receive him. His face told her in a moment that something was wrong. "I've lost the place, but that's my luck. I dreamed an ill dream last night, Mother. Or maybe I saw a ghost. Take it either way, it scared me out of my senses, and I'm not my own man again yet." "Isaac, your face frightens me. Come into the fire. Come in and tell Mother all about it." He was as anxious to tell her as she was to hear, for it had been his hope all the way home that his mother, with her quicker capacity and superior knowledge, might be able to throw some light on the mystery which he could not clear up for himself. His mother's face grew paler and paler as he went on. She never interrupted him by so much as a single word, but when he had done, she moved her chair close to his, put her arm around his neck, and said to him, "Isaac, you dreamed your ill dream on this Wednesday morning. What time was it when you saw the fair woman with the knife in her hand?" Isaac reflected and answered, "Somewhere about 2 o'clock in the morning." His mother struck her hands together with a gesture of despair. "This Wednesday is your birthday, Isaac, and 2 o'clock in the morning is the time when you were born." Isaac's capacities were not quick enough to catch the infection of his mother's superstitious dread. He was amazed and a little startled also when she suddenly rose from her chair, opening her old writing desk, took pen, ink, and paper, and then said to him, "Your memory's but a poor one, Isaac, and now I am an old woman. Mine's not much better. I want all about this dream of yours to be as well known to both of us years hence as it is now. Tell me over again all you told me a minute ago when you spoke of what the woman with the knife looked like." Isaac obeyed, and marvelled much as he saw his mother carefully set down on paper the very words that he was saying. "Light grey eyes," she wrote, "with a droop in her left eyelid, flaxen hair with a yellow gold streak in it, white arms with a down upon them, little lady's hands with a reddish look about the finger-nails, clasp knife with a buckhorn handle that seemed as good as new." Mrs. Scatchard added the year, month, day of the week, and time in the morning when the woman of the dream appeared to her son. She then locked up the paper carefully in her writing desk. Neither on that day nor on any day after could her son induce her to return to the matter of the dream. She obstinately kept her thoughts about it to herself, and even refused to refer again to the paper in her writing desk. Ere long, Isaac grew weary of attempting to make her break her resolute silence, and time gradually wore out the impression produced on him by the dream. He began by thinking of it carelessly, and he ended by not thinking of it at all. This result was the more easily brought about by the advent of some important changes for the better in his prospects. He reaped at last the reward of his long and patient suffering under adversity by getting an excellent place, keeping it for 7 years, and leaving it, on the death of his master, not only with an excellent character, but also with a comfortable annuity bequeathed to him as a reward for saving his mistress's life in a carriage accident. Thus it happened that Isaac Scatchard returned to his old mother 7 years after the time of the dream at the inn, with an annual sum of money at his disposal, sufficient to keep them both in ease and independence for the rest of their lives. The mother, whose health had been bad of late years, profited so much by the care bestowed on her and by freedom from money anxieties that when Isaac's birthday came round she was able to sit up comfortably at table and dine with him. On that day, as the evening drew on, Mrs. Scatchard discovered that a bottle of tonic medicine, which she was accustomed to take, happened to be empty. Isaac immediately volunteered to go to the chemist's and get it filled again. It was a rainy, bleak night, and on going into the chemist's shop he was passed hurriedly by a poorly dressed woman coming out of it. The glimpse he had of her face struck him, and he looked back after her as she descended the doorsteps. "You're noticing that woman?" said the chemist's apprentice behind the counter. "It's my opinion there's something wrong with her. She's been asking for laudanum to put on a bad tooth. Pooh,
Master's out for half an hour, and I told her I wasn't allowed to sell poison to strangers in his absence. She laughed in a queer way and said she would come back in half an hour. If she expects Master to serve her, I think she'd be disappointed. It's a case of suicide, sir, if ever there was one yet."
These words added immeasurably to the sudden interest in the woman which Isaac had felt at the first sight of her face. After he'd got the medicine bottle filled, he looked about anxiously for her as soon as he was out on the street. She was walking slowly up and down on the opposite side of the road. With his heart, very much to his own surprise, beating fast, Isaac crossed over and spoke to her. He asked if she was in any distress. She pointed to her torn shawl, her scanty dress, her crushed, dirty bonnet, then moved under a lamp so as to let the light fall on her stern, pale, but still most beautiful face. "I look like a comfortable, happy woman, don't I?" she said with a bitter laugh. She spoke with a purity of intonation which Isaac had never heard before from other than ladies' lips. Her slightest action seemed to have the easy, negligent grace of a thoroughbred woman. Her skin, for all its poverty-stricken paleness, was as delicate as if her life had been passed in the enjoyment of every social comfort that wealth can purchase. Even her small, finely shaped hands, gloveless as they were, had not lost their whiteness. Little by little, in answer to his questions, the sad story of the woman came out. There is no need to relate it here. It is told over and over again in police reports and paragraphs descriptive of attempted suicides. "My name is Rebecca Murdoch," said the woman, as she ended. "I have 9 pence left, and I thought of spending it at the chemist's over the way and securing a passage to the other world. Whatever it is, it can't be worse to me than this, so why should I stop here?" Besides the natural compassion and sadness moved in his heart by what he heard, Isaac felt within him some mysterious influence at work all the time the woman was speaking, which utterly confused his ideas and almost deprived him of his powers of speech. All that he could say in answer to her last reckless words was that he would prevent her from attempting her own life if he followed her about all night to do it. His rough, trembling earnestness seemed to impress her. "I won't occasion you that trouble," she answered. "You have given me a fancy for living by speaking kindly to me." Isaac was hopelessly taken with the poor woman, and a few more stolen interviews after that first meeting completed his infatuation. In less than a month, he had consented to give Rebecca Murdoch a new interest in existence and a chance of recovering the character she had lost by promising to make her his wife. There was only one thing wanting to perfect his happiness. At their first meeting, there had been mingled with his admiration when he looked in her face a faint, involuntary feeling of doubt whether that face was entirely strange to him. He announced his marriage engagement precipitately and confusedly to his mother on the day when he contracted it. Poor Mrs. Scatchard showed her perfect confidence in her son by flinging her arms around his neck and giving him joy of having found at last a woman to comfort and care for him after his mother was gone. She was all eagerness to see the woman of her son's choice, and the next day was fixed for the introduction. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the little cottage parlour was full of light as Mrs. Scatchard, happy and expectant, dressed for the occasion in her Sunday gown, sat waiting for her son and her future daughter-in-law. Punctual to the appointed time, Isaac hurriedly and nervously led his promised wife into the room. His mother rose to receive her, advanced a few steps, smiling, looked Rebecca full in the eyes, and suddenly stopped. Her face, which had been flushed the moment before, turned white in an instant. Her eyes lost their expression of softness and kindness, and assumed a blank look of terror. Her outstretched hands fell to her sides, and she staggered back a few steps with a low cry to her son. "Isaac," she whispered, clutching him fast by the arm. "Isaac, does that woman's face remind you of nothing?" Before he could answer, before he could look round to where Rebecca stood, astonished and angered by her reception, his mother pointed impatiently to her writing desk and gave him the key. "Open it," she said in a quick, breathless whisper. "What does this mean? Why am I being treated as if I had no business here?" asked Rebecca angrily. "Open it, and give me the paper in the left-hand drawer. Quick, quick, for heaven's sake," said Mrs. Scatchard. Isaac gave her the paper. She looked it over eagerly for a moment, then followed Rebecca, who was now turning away haughtily to leave the room, and caught her by the shoulder.
abruptly raised the long, loose sleeve of her gown, and glanced at her hand and arm. Something like fear began to steal over the angry expression on Rebecca's face as she shook herself free from the old woman's grasp and left the room. Isaac was hastening after her when his mother turned and stopped him. "Light grey eyes," she said. "A droop in the left eyelid. Flaxen hair with a gold streak in it. White arms with a down on them. Little ladies' hands with a reddish look under the fingernails. The dream woman, Isaac. The dream woman." The faint, cleaving doubt, which he had never been able to shake off in Rebecca Murdoch's presence, was fatally set at rest forever. He had seen her face then before, 7 years before, on his birthday, in the bedroom of the lonely inn. "Be warned. Oh, my son, be warned. Isaac, Isaac, let her go, and do you stop with me." Something darkened the parlour window as those words were said. A sudden chill ran through Isaac, and he glanced sidelong at the shadow. Rebecca Murdoch had come back. She was peering in at them over the low window blind. "I have promised to marry, Mother," he said. "And marry I must."
3 weeks after that day, Isaac and Rebecca were man and wife. Although, after that first interview in the cottage parlour, no consideration could induce Mrs. Scatchard to see her son's wife again, or even to talk of her when Isaac tried to plead her cause after their marriage. After some quiet months of married life, Isaac found his wife altering towards him. She grew sullen and contemptuous. She began drinking, and little by little, after the first miserable discovery that his wife was keeping company with drunkards, the shocking certainty forced itself on Isaac that she had grown to be a drunkard herself. He had been in a sadly despondent state for some time before the occurrence of these domestic calamities. His mother's health was failing fast, and he upbraided himself in secret as the cause of the bodily and mental suffering she endured. When to his remorse on his mother's account was added the shame and misery occasioned by the discovery of his wife's degradation, he sank under the double trial. His face began to alter fast, and he looked what he was, a spirit-broken man. His mother, still struggling bravely against the illness that was hurrying her to the grave, was the first to notice the sad alteration in him, and the first to hear of his trouble with his wife. She could only weep bitterly on the day when he made his humiliating confession, but on the next occasion when he went to see her, he found her dressed to go out, and, on asking the reason, received this answer. "I am not long for this world, Isaac," she said, "and I shall not feel easy on my deathbed unless I have done my best to the last to make my son happy. I mean to go with you to your wife and try what I can to reclaim her. Give me your arm, Isaac, and let me do the last thing I can in this world to help my son." He could not disobey her, and they walked together slowly towards his miserable home. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon when they arrived. It was their dinner hour, and Rebecca was in the kitchen. His wife soon came into the parlour, and the meeting between her and Mrs. Scatchard passed off better than he had ventured to anticipate. He was relieved, however, when the conversation ended, and Rebecca began to lay the cloth for dinner. She brought in the bread tray, cut a slice from the loaf for her husband, then returned to the kitchen. At that moment, Isaac, still anxiously watching his mother, was startled by seeing the same ghastly change pass over her face, which had altered it so awfully on the morning when Rebecca and she first met. Before he could say a word, she whispered with a look of horror, "Take me back. Home again, Isaac. Come with me and never go back again." He was afraid to ask for an explanation. He could only sign her to be silent and help her quickly to the door. As they passed the bread tray on the table, she stopped and pointed to it. "Did you see what your wife cut your bread with?" she asked in a low whisper. "Look." He did look. A new clasp knife with a buckhorn handle lay with the loaf in the bread tray. His mother caught at his arm. "The knife of your dream, Isaac. Oh, I am faint with fear. Take me away before she comes back." He was hardly able to support her.
The visible, tangible reality of the knife struck him with a panic. By a desperate effort he summoned self-possession enough to help his mother out of the house and back to her cottage. Against his mother's most earnest entreaties, Isaac returned home to find that his wife had discovered their secret departure. She had been drinking, and was in a fury of passion. The dinner in the kitchen was flung under the grate. The cloth was off the parlour table. Where was the knife? Unwisely, he asked for it. She was only too glad of the opportunity of irritating him. He wanted the knife, did he? Could he give her a reason why? No? Then he should not have it. Not if he went down on his knees to ask for it. Further recriminations elicited the fact that she brought it at a bargain, and that she considered it her own special property. Isaac saw the uselessness of attempting to get the knife by fair means, and determined to search for it later in the day in secret. The search was unsuccessful. Night came on, and he left the house to walk about the streets. He was afraid now to sleep in the same room with her. 3 weeks passed. Still sullenly enraged with him, she would not give up the knife, and still that fear of sleeping in the same room with her possessed him. He walked about at night, or dozed in the parlour, or sat watching by his mother's bedside. Before the expiration of the first week in the new month, his mother died. Isaac was present at her death, and her last words in this world were addressed to him. "Don't go back, my son. Don't go back." He was obliged to go back, if it were only to watch his wife. Exasperated by his distrust of her, she revengefully sought to add a sting to his grief by declaring that she would attend the funeral. In spite of all he could do or say, she held with wicked pertinacity to her words, and on the day appointed for the burial, forced herself, inflamed and shameless with drink, into her husband's presence, and declared that she would walk in the funeral procession to his mother's grave. This last, worst outrage, accompanied by all that was most insulting in word and look, maddened him for the moment. He struck her. The instant the blow was dealt, he repented it. She crouched down, silent, in the corner of the room, and eyed him steadily. It was a look that cooled his hot blood and made him tremble. But there was no time now to think of a means of making atonement. Nothing remained but to risk the worst till the funeral was over. There was but one way of making sure of her. He locked her into her bedroom. When he came back some hours after, he found her sitting very much altered in look and bearing by the bedside, with a bundle on her lap. She rose and faced him with a strange composure. "No man has ever struck me twice," she said, "and my husband shall have no second opportunity. From this day forth, we see each other no more." Before he could answer, she passed him and left the room. He saw her walk away up the street. Would she return? All that night he watched and waited, but no footsteps came near the house. The next night, overcome by fatigue, he lay down in the bed in his clothes, with the door locked, the key on the table, and the candle burning. His slumber was not disturbed. The third night, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth passed, and nothing happened. He lay down on the seventh, still in his clothes, still with the door locked, the key on the table, and the candle burning, but easier in his mind. Easier in his mind and in perfect health of body when he fell off to sleep. But his rest was disturbed. He woke twice without any sensation of uneasiness, but the third time it was with that never-to-be-forgotten shivering of the night at the lonely inn, that dreadful sinking pain at the heart which once more aroused him in an instant. His eyes opened towards the left-hand side of the bed, and there stood the dream woman again. No. His wife. The living reality, with the dream spectre's face, in the dream spectre's attitude, the fair arm up, the knife clasped in the delicate white hand. He sprang upon her, almost at the instant of seeing her, and yet not quickly enough to prevent her from hiding the knife. Without a word from him, without a cry from her, he pinioned her in the chair. With one hand he felt up her sleeve, and there, where the dream woman had hidden the knife, his wife had hidden it, the knife with the buckhorn handle that looked like new. In the despair of that dreadful moment, his brain was steady, his heart was calm. He looked at her fixedly with the knife in his hand and said these last words. "You told me we should see each other no more, and you have come back. It is my turn now to go, and to go forever. I say that we shall see each other no more, and my word shall not be broken." He left her and set forth into the night. There was a bleak wind abroad, and the smell of recent rain was in the air. The distant church clocks chimed the quarter as he walked rapidly beyond the last houses in the suburb. He asked the first policeman he met what hour that was at which the quarter had just struck. The man referred sleepily to his watch and answered, 2 o'clock. 2 in the morning. What day of the month was this day that had just begun? He reckoned it up from the date of his mother's funeral. The fatal parallel was complete. It was his birthday. Had he escaped the mortal peril which his dream foretold, or had he only received a second warning? As this ominous doubt forced itself on his mind, he stopped, reflected, and turned back again towards the city. He was still resolute to hold his word, and never to let her see him more. But there was a thought now in his mind of having her watched and followed. The knife was in his possession, the world was before him, but a new distrust of her, a vague, unspeakable, superstitious dread had overcome him. "I must know where she goes, now she thinks I have left her," he said to himself, as he stole back wearily to the precincts of his house. It was still dark. He waited outside, never losing sight of the house till daylight. Then he ventured indoors, listened, and heard nothing, looked into the kitchen, scullery, parlour, and found nothing, went up at last into the bedroom. It was empty. Whither had she gone? No mortal tongue could tell him. The darkness had covered her flight, and when the day broke no man could say where the light found her. Before leaving the house and the town forever, he gave instructions to a friend and neighbour to sell his furniture for anything that it would fetch, and to apply the proceeds towards employing the police to trace her. The directions were honestly followed, and the money was well spent, but the inquiries led to nothing. At this part of the narrative the landlord paused, and turning towards the window of the room in which we were sitting, looked in the direction of the stable-yard. "So far," he said, "I tell you what was told to me. The little that remains to be added lies within my own experience. Between 2 and 3 months after the events I've just been relating, Isaac Scatchard came to me and asked for employment here. He has the perpetual thought that his wife is alive and looking for him. I believe he would not let himself drive off to sleep towards 2 in the morning for a king's ransom. 2 in the morning, he says, is the time she will find him one of these days. 2 in the morning is the time all the year round when he likes to be most certain that he has got the clasp knife safe about him. She's looking for me, is all he says when anybody speaks to him about the one anxiety of his life. She's looking for me. He may be right. She may be looking for him. Who can tell? Who can tell, said I.
The Waxworks by A.M. Burridge.
There's nothing new in your request, said the manager. In fact, we refuse it to different people about 3 times a week. We've nothing to gain and something to lose by letting people spend the night in our murderer's den. If I allowed it and some young idiot lost his senses, what would be my position? But your being a journalist somewhat alters this case. Hewson smiled. I suppose you mean that journalists have no senses to lose. Oh, no, laughed the manager. But here we do have something to gain, publicity and advertisement. What is your paper, Mr. Hewson? I'm freelancing at present, Hewson confessed, working on space for several papers. However, I should find no difficulty in getting the story printed. The Morning Echo would use it like a shot. A night with mariners' murderers. The manager nodded. Very well, Mr. Hewson, he said. Get your story printed in the Morning Echo, and there'll be a £5 note waiting for you here. But it's no small ordeal that you're proposing to undertake. I own I shouldn't care to take it on. I've seen those figures dressed and undressed. I know all about the process of their manufacture, but I should hate having to sleep down there among them. Why? Asked Hewson. I don't know. There isn't any reason. It's just that I couldn't sit alone among them all night, with their seeming to stare at me in the way they do. If you're susceptible to atmosphere, I warn you that you're in for a very uncomfortable night. You're not superstitious? Said the manager. Not a bit, Hewson laughed. But you're a journalist. You must have a strong imagination. News editors have always complained that I haven't any. Plain facts are not considered sufficient in our trade, and the papers don't like offering their readers unbuttered bread. The manager smiled and rose. Right, he said. I think the last of the people have gone. I'll give orders for the figures downstairs not to be draped, and let the night people know that you'll be here. Then I'll take you down and show you round. He picked up the receiver of a house telephone, spoke into it, and presently replaced it. One condition I'm afraid I must impose on you, he remarked. I must ask you not to smoke. We had a fire scare down in the murderer's den this evening. I don't know who gave the alarm, but whosoever it was a false one. Fortunately, there were very few people down there at the time, or there might have been a panic. If you're ready, we'll make a move. Hewson followed the manager through 6 rooms. The manager stopped once and spoke to a man in uniform, saying something about an armchair in the murderer's den. It's the best we can do for you, I'm afraid, he said to Hewson. I hope you'll be able to get some sleep. He led the way through an open barrier and down ill-lit stone stairs, which conveyed a sinister impression of giving access to a dungeon. In a passage at the bottom were a few preliminary horrors, such as relics of the Inquisition, a rack taken from a medieval castle, branding irons, thumbscrews, and other mementos of man's cruelty to man. Beyond the passage was the murderer's den. It was a room of irregular shape with a vaulted roof, and dimly lit by electric lights burning behind inverted bowls of frosted glass. It was, by design, an eerie and uncomfortable chamber, a chamber whose atmosphere invited its visitors to speak in whispers. The waxwork murderers stood on low pedestals with numbered tickets at their feet. Seeing them elsewhere, and without knowing whom they represented, one would have thought them a dull-looking crew, chiefly remarkable for the shabbiness of their clothes. The manager, walking around with Hewson, pointed out several of the more interesting of these unholy notabilities. That's Crippen. I expect you recognise him. Insignificant little beast who looks as if he couldn't tread on a worm. That's Armstrong. Looks like a decent, harmless country gentleman, doesn't he? And of course this... Who's that? Hewson interrupted. Oh, I was coming to him, said the manager. Come and have a good look at him. This is our star turn. He's the only one of the bunch that hasn't been hanged. The figure was of a small, slight man, not much more than 5 feet in height. It wore little waxed moustaches, large spectacles, and a caped coat. There was something so exaggeratedly French in its appearance that it reminded Hewson of a stage caricature. He could not have said precisely why the mild-looking face seemed to him so repellent, but he had already recoiled a step, and, even in the manager's company, it cost him an effort to look again. "But who is he?" he asked. "That," said the manager, "is Dr. Baudet." Hewson shook his head doubtfully. "I think I've heard the name," he said, "but I forget in connection with what?" The manager smiled. "You'd remember better if you were a Frenchman," he said. "For some long while that man was the terror of Paris. He carried on his work of healing by day and of throat-cutting by night, when the fit was on him. He killed for the sheer devilish pleasure it gave him to kill, and always in the same way, with a razor. When he realized that the toils of the law were closing about him, he mysteriously disappeared, and ever since the police of every civilized country have been looking for him. There's no doubt that he managed to make away with himself, and by some means which has prevented his body coming to light." Hewson shuddered. "Oh, I don't like him at all," he confessed. "Oh, what eyes he's got!" "You find the eyes bite into you? Well, that's excellent realism then, for Baudet practised mesmerism. He was supposed to mesmerize his victims before dispatching them." I thought I saw him move," said Hewson, with a catch in his voice. The manager smiled again. "You'll have more than one optical illusion before the night's out, I expect, but you shan't be locked in, and you can come upstairs when you've had enough. There are watchmen on the premises, so you'll find company. Don't be alarmed if you hear them moving about. I'm sorry I can't give you any more light, because all the lights are on. For obvious reasons, we keep this place as gloomy as possible." After the manager bade him good night and Hewson was left alone, he wheeled the armchair, a heavy one upholstered in plush, a little way down the central gangway, and deliberately turned it so that its back was towards the effigy of Dr. Baudet. For some undefined reason, he liked Dr. Baudet a great deal less than his companions. As the attendants' footfalls died away throughout the building, and a deep hush stole over the chamber, he realized that he had no slight ordeal before him. A dim, unwavering light fell on the rows of figures, which were so uncannily like human beings that the silence and the stillness seemed unnatural and even ghastly. There was not a breath in the chamber to stir a curtain or rustle a hanging drapery or start a shadow. All was still to the gaze and silent to the ear. "It must be like this at the bottom of the sea," he thought. The sinister figures were only waxworks. So long as he let that thought dominate all others, he promised himself that all would be well. It did not, however, save him from the discomfort occasioned by the waxen stare of Dr. Baudet, which he knew was directed upon him from behind. The eyes of the little Frenchman's effigy haunted and tormented him, and he itched with the desire to turn and look. "Come on," he thought. "My nerves have started already. If I turn and look at that dressed-up dummy, it will be an admission of fear." And then another voice in his brain spoke to him. "It's because you're afraid that you won't turn and look at him." The two voices quarrelled silently for a moment or two, and at last Hewson slewed his chair round and looked behind him. Among the many figures standing in stiff, unnatural poses, the effigy of the dreadful little doctor stood out with a queer prominence, perhaps because a steady beam of light beat straight down upon it. Hewson flinched before the parody of mildness which some fiendishly skilled craftsman had managed to convey in wax, met the eyes for one agonized second, and turned again to face the other direction. "He's only a waxwork like the rest of you," he muttered defiantly. "You're all only waxworks." They were only waxworks, yes, but waxworks don't move. Not that he had seen the least movement anywhere, but it struck him that in the moment or two while he had looked behind him, there had been a subtle change in the grouping of the figures in front. Crippen, for instance, seemed to have turned at least 1 degree to the left. "And they tell me I've got no imagination," Hewson said beneath his breath. He took a notebook from his pocket and wrote quickly. "Mem. Deathly silence and unearthly stillness of figures, like being bottom of sea. Hypnotic eyes of Dr. Baudet. Figures seem to move when not being watched." He closed the book suddenly and looked round. He had neither seen nor heard a movement, but it was as if some sixth sense had made him aware of one. He looked straight into the countenance of Major Armstrong, which smiled back as if to say, "It wasn't I." Of course it wasn't he, or any of them. It was his own nerves. Or was it? Hadn't Crippen moved again during that moment when his attention was directed elsewhere? Oh, you couldn't trust that little man. Once you took your eyes off him, he took advantage of it to shift his position. That was what they were all doing. If he only knew it, he told himself, and half rose out of his chair. Then he sat down again. This was very cowardly and very absurd. They were only waxworks, and they couldn't move. Let him hold that thought, and all would yet be well. Then why all that silent unrest about him? A subtle something in the air which did not quite break the silence, and happened, whichever way he looked, just beyond the boundaries of his vision. He swung round quickly to encounter the baleful stare of Dr. Baudette. Then, without warning, he jerked his head back to stare straight at Crippen. Ha! He'd nearly caught Crippen that time. "You'd better be careful, Crippen, and all the rest of you. If I do see one of you move, I'll smash you to pieces. Do you hear?" He looked all about him. Everywhere his gaze encountered the vacant waxen faces, and everywhere he felt that by just some least fraction of a second he had missed seeing a movement of a hand or foot, a silent opening or compression of lips, a flicker of eyelids, a look of human intelligence now smoothed out. They were like naughty children in a class, but blandly innocent when his gaze was turned upon them. This would not do. This distinctly would not do. He must clutch at something, grip with his mind upon something which belonged essentially to the workday world, to the daylight London streets. He was Raymond Hewson, an unsuccessful journalist, a living and breathing man, and these figures grouped around him were only dummies, so they could neither move nor whisper. What did it matter if they were supposed to be lifelike effigies of murderers? They were only made of wax and sawdust, and stood there for the entertainment of morbid sightseers and orange-sucking trippers. Oh, that was better. Now, what was that funny story which somebody had told him yesterday? He recalled part of it, but not all, for the gaze of Dr. Baudette urged, challenged, and finally compelled him to turn. Hewson half-turned, and then swung his chair so as to bring him face to face with the wearer of those dreadful hypnotic eyes. "You moved!" he cried. "Yes, you did! Blast you! I saw you!" Then he sat quite still, staring straight before him, like a man found frozen in the Arctic snows. Dr. Baudette's movements were leisurely. He stepped off his pedestal with the mincing care of a lady alighting from a bus. The platform stood about 2 feet from the ground, and above the edge of it a plush-covered rope hung in arc-like curves. Dr. Baudette lifted up the rope until it formed an arch for him to pass under, stepped off the platform, and sat down on the edge facing Hewson. Then he nodded and smiled and said, "Good evening. I need hardly tell you," he continued, in perfect English, in which was traceable only the least foreign accent, "that not until I overheard the conversation between you and the worthy manager of this establishment did I suspect that I should have the pleasure of a companion here for the night. You cannot move or speak without my bidding, but you can hear me perfectly well. Something tells me that you are, shall I say, nervous? My dear sir, have no illusions. I am not one of these contemptible effigies miraculously come to life. I am Dr. Baudette himself." He paused, coughed, and shifted his legs. "Pardon me," he resumed, "but I am a little stiff, and let me explain. Circumstances with which I need not fatigue you have made it desirable that I should live in England. I was close to this building this evening when I saw a policeman regarding me a little too curiously. I guessed that he intended to follow and perhaps ask me embarrassing questions. So I mingled with the crowd and came in here. An extra coin bought my admission to the chamber in which we now meet, and an inspiration showed me a certain means of escape. I raised a cry of fire, and when all the fools had rushed to the stairs, I stripped my effigy of the caped coat which you behold me wearing, donned it, hid my effigy under the platform at the back, and took its place on the pedestal. I own that I have since spent a very fatiguing evening, but fortunately I was not always being watched, and had opportunities to draw an occasional deep breath and ease the rigidity of my pose. One small boy screamed and exclaimed that he saw me moving. I understand that he was to be whipped and put straight to bed on his return home. The manager's description of me, which I had the embarrassment of being compelled to overhear, was biased but not altogether inaccurate. Clearly I am not dead, although it is well that the world thinks otherwise. His account of my hobby, which I have indulged for years, was in the main true. The world is divided between collectors and non-collectors. With the non-collectors we are not concerned. The collectors collect anything according to their individual tastes, from money to cigarette cards, from moths to matchboxes. I collect throats. He paused again and regarded Hewson's throat with interest mingled with disfavour. "I am obliged to the chance which brought us together tonight," he continued, "and perhaps it would seem ungrateful to complain, but you have a skinny neck, sir. If you will overlook a personal remark, I should never have selected you from choice. I like men with thick necks, thick, red necks." He fumbled in an inside pocket and took out something which he tested against a wet forefinger, and then proceeded to pass gently to and fro across the palm of his left hand. "This is a little French razor," he remarked blandly. "They are not much used in England, but perhaps you know them? One strops them on wood. The blade, you will observe, is very narrow. They do not cut very deep, but deep enough. In just one little moment you shall see for yourself. I shall ask you the little civil question of all polite barbers. Does the razor suit you, sir?" He rose up, a diminutive but menacing figure of evil, and approached Hewson with the silent, furtive step of a hunting panther. "You will have the goodness," he said, "to raise your chin a little. Thank you. And a little more? Oh, just a little more. Oh, thank you. Merci, monsieur. Ah, merci, merci." Over one end of the chamber was a thick skylight of frosted glass, which by day let in a few sickly and filtered rays from the floor above. After sunrise these began to mingle with the subdued light from the electric bulbs, and this mingled illumination added a certain ghastliness to a scene which needed no additional touch of horror. The waxwork figures stood apathetically in their places, waiting to be admired or execrated by the crowds who would presently wander fearfully among them. In their midst, Hewson sat still, leaning far back in his armchair. His chin was up-tilted, as if he were waiting to receive attention from a barber, and although there was not a scratch upon his throat, nor anywhere upon his body, he was cold and dead. His previous employers were wrong in having credited him with no imagination. Dr. Baudet on his pedestal watched the dead man unemotionally. He did not move, nor was he capable of motion. But then, after all, he was only a waxwork. by W.L. George. "And that," said Mr. Wallingham, "is the end." "May I congratulate you, Mr. Wallingham?" said Miss Medhurst. "I'm sure it will be a great success like all your novels." Mr. Wallingham leant back in his armchair, fingertips joined, staring at the ceiling with a certain complacency. He was a shortish, stoutish man, aged about 40, with a rosy complexion, well-kept hands, and a neatly clipped moustache. Upon his mouth lingered a little private smile, as if he were listing in his mind past triumphs. Mr. Wallingham was successful. Mr. Wallingham looked successful. Still, at that moment, Mr. Wallingham was conscious of some uneasiness, a sense of, how could he put it, secret criticism? He felt as if he were not alone, as if something faintly hostile stood by his side. "I will read you the last page," he said. "Oh," she gasped, "please do." A faint flush rose in her pale cheeks as she grew conscious of her own excitement. Miss Medhurst was of indeterminable age, between 30 and 40. She was small, thin, with little features that had once been pretty. Her eyes grew large and soft as she gazed upon the man whose secretary she had been for 10 years. Mr. Wallingham cleared his throat and read, "The 6 men stood undecided about the long shape that lay upon the ground. It was as if they feared to touch that sumptuously wild buccaneer, heavy-breeched, scarlet-sashed, so dark and fierce and beautiful, lest the slightest movement should release the mortal spark that lingered still in the faintly heaving breast. At last Moreno spoke. 'We cannot leave him here,' he said. 'The sun is too hot.' Indeed, from the purple vault above, the Mexican sun felt like a heavy hand, and the air was filled with the buzzing of insects. The air was crowded with life. Moreno, pitiless and crime-stained, felt his heart grow big and painful as he thought that nature was filled with life, yet could not afford another hour to Perez. Perez, the man without fear, his comrade who lay there dying. 'Come,' he said gently, 'let us carry him into the house.'" Mr. Wallingham continued, totally engrossed in his rendition. "A few minutes later they stood a little away from the bedside. Perez breathed more hurriedly. He grew yet paler, and Moreno stepped forward, an anguish upon him. Then, for one moment, his comrade opened his eyes, those soft, lustrous eyes. His lips twisted into a crooked smile, as for the last time he met the gaze of Moreno. But, very slowly, his head sank down and was still. Thus he lay, his dark face sharp outlined against the pillow as an ancient bronze, black beard erect, in death defiant as in life. Moreno fell upon his knees. "Goodbye, Eagle-Heart, goodbye," he cried. One by one the others stole away. Perez lay still and aloof, and his soul, winging its way through space, carried as a last memory the sound of his comrades weeping. Miss Medhurst did not move. Her eyes were dim, for she too loved the eagle-hearted buccaneer. So she did not notice that as Mr. Wallingham pronounced the last word, he started so violently that his knees rapped against the desk. For Mr. Wallingham had distinctly heard a voice, a loud, indignant voice, and what it said was, "Nonsense." "Oh, it's wonderful," murmured Miss Medhurst. "Wonderful. But why must Perez die? I suppose it's artistic truth, and—" "Miss Medhurst," said Mr. Wallingham, in a voice suddenly metallic and laboured, "if you don't mind, I won't do any more today. I'm not very well." She bent forward with quick sympathy. "Oh, yes, of course. Work like yours takes all your strength. I'll go. Oh, and please, Mr. Wallingham, rest. Go into the park, and I'm sure a tonic—" Mr. Wallingham was not listening. He sat with clenched hands. When Miss Medhurst said, "Why must Perez die?" a voice had grumbled, "He didn't." For a long time Mr. Wallingham sat with his face in his hands. "How can you be so absurd?" he asked himself. "You let yourself become the prey of your nerves just because you're a little overworked. Old Medhurst is right. She's been at me for months to take a rest. Anyhow," Mr. Wallingham suddenly grew defiant and addressed the wall. "Speak up. Now's your chance. I'm listening." There was no reply, and, nearly comforted, Mr. Wallingham got into his evening clothes and went to his club. That night he slept almost at once, and awoke the next morning to find that his valet had gone out, leaving by his side his letters, the newspapers, and the morning tea. "Oh," he thought as he stretched, "I feel better," and began to drink his tea. Then, quite suddenly, the cup fell crashing and unnoticed to the ground. A man was standing at the foot of his bed, looking at him with a disagreeable expression. Mr. Wallingham made a violent effort to speak, but found his tongue palsied. Then a voice, the familiar voice that had haunted him, grew audible. "Well," said the shape, "surprised to see me, I suppose." Mr. Wallingham did not reply. "You've given me a lot of trouble," the thing went on. "Materializing isn't as easy as you novelists make out. When I think of the weeks of bother I've had over this business, I've a good mind. Still, that's not what I've really come for. Wallingham, that ending of yours is nonsense. Pure bunkum." "What do you want?" asked Mr. Wallingham feebly, for this insult to his literary powers galvanized him. "I want you to alter the ending, and you'll do it, sure as my name's Perez." Mr. Wallingham still stared at the thing. Perez! He had known at once that tall, black-bearded shape with the lustrous dark eyes, had recognized the full trousers and the scarlet sash. His buccaneer! But this was awful. Was he going mad? "Look here," said Perez, "I've got no time to waste. That ending of yours is bunkum because I didn't die. Understand? I didn't die. It's quite true that Moreno, whom you have the audacity to call my friend, the scab who cheated me out of $33 at Euchre last night, carried me in. But that's where what you call your imagination failed. Mercedes was in the house. For a fortnight she fed me on milk, and I got perfectly well. As soon as I felt strong enough, I murdered her and took charge of her savings, which I'm glad to say were considerable." "You murdered the woman who saved your life?" cried Mr. Wallingham. "Of course. You may think it ungrateful of me, but I'm not a respectable character. You made me like that, and if I killed Mercedes, it's your fault." "Well, I like your cheek," said Mr. Wallingham. "Don't interrupt," grumbled Perez. "With her savings I went to Mexico City and bought myself a small saloon at number 11 Calle Berganza. So you see your ending isn't true. It isn't artistic truth." "What?" shouted Mr. Wallingham, springing up in the bed. "You dare to stand there and lecture me on artistic truth? Please remember to whom you're talking. Obviously the ending's inartistic. If you'll just look up Chapter 8 and observe the psychology of—" Here the discussion grew confused, and Mr. Wallingham found himself at a disadvantage, for Perez knew a great many things about the psychology of the other characters and of Perez which had never occurred to the novelist. There was a tap at the door. Mr. Wallingham's valet came in and said, "Your bath is ready, sir," then withdrew, Perez being obviously invisible to him. "All right," said Perez. "Go and have your bath. I know you think best in the bath. But," he added threateningly, "I'll come back." He began to grow faint. "I'll teach you artistic truth." "Mr. Wallingham," said Miss Medhurst, as she buttoned her gloves prior to going out to lunch, Please don't think me impertinent, but I'm sure you're working too hard. You mean that my work is not up to standard? Oh, I don't mean anything of the kind, protested the little spinster. I think you're wonderful. Only I thought yesterday and again this morning, well, you know, you had to stop dictating and... Yes, I know. Mr. Wallingham had indeed been paralysed for several minutes, while Perez stood behind Miss Medhurst's chair and made ferocious faces. When at last Mr. Wallingham decided to affront him, and trembling resumed an incoherent dictation, Perez punctuated every other sentence with loud cries of "rot," while Miss Medhurst shrank from her author's livid face. Inspiration, she thought, is a beautiful, terrible thing. The days that followed brought no improvement in Mr. Wallingham's condition. Perez had begun by appearing twice in one day. Within a week he took to materialising every 4 hours or so. "I say, Wally, old boy," he remarked, "this materialising isn't as difficult as it looks. In time I may be able to keep it up day and night, and then I swear I'll never leave you at all." Soon Mr. Wallingham realised that Perez was right. He appeared in the park and followed his author all the way to the publisher, arguing incessantly. He was beginning to develop theories. "You've made a mess of the whole thing," he said. "On thinking it over carefully, I don't think I should have killed Pepita before eloping with Ines. As for Isabel, I rather think I shot her father, so you should say in Chapter 5. As the days passed, the author felt a dull brutalization creep over him. His ruddy colour was leaving him, and his waistcoat began to sag. Miss Medhurst fluttered about him. "Tell me what's the matter," she implored. Mr. Wallingham looked at her wildly. Perhaps something of her immense tenderness touched him, for he suddenly spoke. "Don't think me mad. I don't know what to do. It keeps following me about and arguing." The horror of the past few days was released as he told Miss Medhurst everything. Gripping the wiry little hand that trembled and yielded, he cried out as a child, "Oh, I'm right! Tell me I'm right!" "Yes," whispered Miss Medhurst, "of course you're right. Who can teach you anything? Don't alter your novel. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to humanity." This was terrible, she thought. The man chosen of the Muses was dying before her eyes. Worse, his reason was dying because of a wretched illusion. Oh, if only she could take it upon herself. Aghast at her audacity, she put her hand on the stricken man's shoulder. "Mr. Wallingham," she whispered, "do you hear me? It is an illusion. Do you understand? It is an illusion." "Yes," said the novelist. "Then if it is an illusion, let us face it. Prove to yourself that it is only an illusion." "Prove?" uttered Mr. Wallingham. "How?" "He said he lived in Mexico, that he kept a saloon. Well, go and see. Go to Mexico." "Go to Mexico?" shouted Mr. Wallingham. "Yes, go and see. When you get there, very likely you'll find a bank at the address he gave you, and then you'll know it was only an illusion. You'll be free." Mr. Wallingham thought for a long time, then gently took her hand and said, "Perhaps you're right, but don't let me go alone. Come with me." A sickly man wrapped in a travelling rug staggered onto the platform, hanging with a curious air of helplessness to the arm of a slim, capable little woman. Behind them, in procession, came several swarthy porters laden with baggage. The commissionaire of the Hotel de las Cuatro Naciones, disguised as a full general, led the way. The little woman erupted into the Spanish she had acquired on board ship, directed the porters to wait with the equipage, gave the commissionaire 5 pesos to help the heavy luggage through customs, and gently led the grey-faced man to the waiting omnibus. "Now, Mr. Wallingham," she said briskly 30 minutes later, "you must stay in bed and rest. Nothing can be done today. First you must sleep." "All right," said Mr. Wallingham wearily. He shut his eyes. With a sudden fond gesture, Miss Medhurst smoothed the creases from the pillow and left the room. She stayed only a few minutes longer, just long enough to wash her thin, intelligent face and to smile as she powdered her nose, for this was a new habit. For a moment on the steps of the hotel she shrank from the broad expanse of the plaza. Then she clenched her fist and called a cab. Her course was fixed in advance. The driver must carry her to a church selected from the plan of Mexico City and must inevitably pass through the Calle Berganza. She would not arouse suspicion by naming the Street of Doom. Her excitement was so powerful that the broad white streets became to her mere symbols. She saw only the nameplates: Calle de Tampico, Calle de Santa Fe, then at last Calle Berganza. 27, 25, a little street of old, mean houses. 19, a dog rooting in a dustbin. 13... She passed number 11, was conscious horribly of the bush over the door. Indeed, it was not a bank, but a little bar. Miss Medhurst stopped the driver by a violent tug at the coat-tail, leapt out and ran back. As she stared into the little bar, for a moment she could see nothing through the dirty panes. Then a shape. Miss Medhurst tottered as she walked away. She had recognized the tall, dark man with the soft eyes and the black beard. All through the night Miss Medhurst tossed in the high Spanish bed. Perez! It was Perez! When morning came she was paler than Mr. Wallingham. As she entered his room he was speaking to the shade, and for a moment she thought that she, too, could now glimpse Perez against the flowered curtain. Mad! Both mad! But a savage purpose told her to gain time, to make Mr. Wallingham dress, to drive him wildly through the town into the suburbs, only to gain time to think. The novelist did not resist, seemed to have lost even the desire to hasten to the place of trial, or to flee from it. Obediently, when lunch was done, he lay down for a siesta. All he said was, "If you're going out, remember this is Mexico, and take your revolver." He had given her the weapon and loaded it himself, for Mr. Wallingham's novels were slightly sensational, and he expected life to equal them. Miss Medhurst went out into the heat that struck up from the stones. She remembered Mr. Wallingham's metaphor, like a heavy hand. She sped through the desert streets, a grim, earnest little figure, careless of sights, on the route of yesterday. At the corner of Calle Berganza she paused, then ran. Number 11 stood open, and without an apparent tremor she went in. As her eyes, sun-blinded, recovered sight, she took in the few details: the wooden tables, the few iron chairs, the counter, the armchair on which slumbered a man of destiny. Her limbs shook, but Miss Medhurst rapped a table with her knuckles until Perez half opened his eyes. "Té," she said harshly. "Con leche." Perez stared at her. Tea? With milk? At 2:30? He expressed this view. Also, the mozo had gone home for a siesta. He was alone in the cafe. "Té con leche," snapped Miss Medhurst. Perez reflected that she was English, and therefore a lunatic, therefore also rich. After some time he brought in an amazing vile liquid. The little spinster watched his face. "Am I mad?" she thought. Then, "No, it is he," and she drank the tea. She had nothing to say. This was the end, and yet she could not go. Time, gain time, she must. Desperately, she asked if this was an old inn. "No sé," replied Perez sleepily. She found herself explaining that her employer was an antiquarian who studied old inns. Might she visit the inn? Perez was about to refuse, but observed in Miss Medhurst's hand a 20 pesos note. Lunatic, he thought. He shrugged his shoulders and led the way up steep wooden steps. They stood in a dark, shuttered bedroom. A carved oak chest ran up to the black beams. On the mantelpiece stood a cheap statuette of a saint. In an alcove she saw the high, white bed. "The carpet," said Perez, proudly pointing to the horror from Brussels, "is new." He turned to her, smiling. She did not know what had happened. She did not know what she did. She heard a shot, a cry, found herself laughing and crying on her knees by the side of the man she had slain, found her tiny strength tenfold multiplied as she hauled him to the bed, set upon the pillow the limp head. Before she fled through the lonely, brilliant streets, she thrust the revolver into the relaxed hand. She found Mr. Wallingham up and excited. "Where have you been all this time?" he cried crossly. "I feel so funny. I was talking to him a quarter of an hour ago. He vanished in the middle of a word. Oh, I feel so ill." "Come with me," said Miss Medhurst firmly. "Come now. Quick, hurry!" Her new cunning told her to make him walk to arouse no notice. That cunning led her and her trembling charge into the bar where a dirty mozo now sat and smoked. It told her to make her scanty Spanish incomprehensible, until at last the mozo said he must fetch his master. He called up the wooden stairs. Miss Medhurst's fingers entered like claws into Mr. Wallingham's arm. There was no reply. "Senor!" called the mozo again. Again, no reply. The man's feet sounded loud as he went up the stairs. A moment later they heard him cry out, and as if drawn by a predominant will, they ran up the stairs. "Oh!" screamed the waiter. But there was no horror in Mr. Wallingham's face. With enraptured eyes he gazed at the long, red-sashed body, at the black beard that stood erect, outlined against the pillow. Colour rushed into his cheeks. He looked erect, confident in his fame. "I was right," he cried. "It was artistic truth." His voice rose. He shouted into a realm now devoid of phantoms. "I was right, right, artistically right."
Le Horla by Guy de Maupassant. May the 8th. A perfect day. I spent all the morning lying on the grass of my house under the huge plane tree which casts its shade over the whole building. I love this house where I grew up. From my windows I can see the Seine flowing past my garden on the other side of the road, almost part of my property, the deep, broad river running from Rouen to Havre, thronged with passing boats. It was a gorgeous morning today. About 11 o'clock, a long line of ships passed in front of my garden gate, towed by a tug no bigger than a fly, puffing painfully and spitting out a thick cloud of smoke. Behind two English schooners, whose red ensign fluttered in the breeze, came a splendid Brazilian three-master, all white, beautifully clean and shining. I took off my hat to her. I don't know why. She was such a magnificent sight. May the 12th. For the last few days I've been a little feverish. I've not been feeling quite the thing, or rather, I've been a bit depressed. What is the origin of those mysterious influences which change our happiness into depression and our good spirits into anxiety? It is as if the air, the invisible air, was full of unseen, unknown powers whose proximity affects us. I wake up full of life, wanting to sing. I wonder why. May the 16th. I'm definitely ill. Last month I was so well. I've got a fever, or rather, some feverish nerve complaint which affects my soul as much as my body. I'm ceaselessly gripped by this horrible sensation of impending danger, this anticipation of some imminent misfortune or approaching death.
a presentiment which is without doubt the symptom of some unknown disease developing in the blood and in the flesh. May the 18th. I've just been to see my doctor, for I can't get any sleep. He found my pulse rapid, my eyes dilated, and my nerves on edge, but nothing really alarming. I have to take showers and drink some potassium bromide. May the 25th. No change. My condition is certainly very strange. As evening approaches, an unaccountable anxiety seizes me, as if the night hid some terrible threat to my life. I hurry over my dinner and try to read, but I don't understand the words, and I can hardly read the letters. Then I pace up and down my sitting room, oppressed by a vague, overmastering fear. Fear of going to bed and sleeping. At about 10 o'clock I go to my bedroom, and as soon as I get there I double-lock the door and bolt it. I'm afraid. Of what? I've never been nervous before. I open my cupboards and look under the bed. I listen and listen. For what? Isn't it strange that a little discomfort, perhaps something wrong with my circulation, a slight congestion, some quite trivial upset in the defective, delicate working of our physical mechanism, has the power to turn the most cheerful of men into a melancholic, the bravest into a coward? Soon I get into bed and wait for sleep, as one would wait for the hangman. I wait for sleep in a state of terror, my heart thumping and my limbs twitching. I shiver all over in spite of the warmth of the bedclothes, till suddenly I fall asleep like a man plunging into a stagnant pool to drown himself. I am not conscious of the approach of sleep as I used to be. It is now a treacherous foe lurking near me, ready to seize me by the head, close my eyes, and destroy me. I sleep for some time, 2 or 3 hours. Then a nightmare seizes me. I know quite well that I am in bed asleep. I feel it and I know it. And I am conscious, too, of someone approaching me, looking at me, touching me. Next he climbs onto the bed, kneels on my chest, seizes my throat and grips it with all his strength to strangle me. I struggle, paralyzed by the ghastly impotence which affects one in a dream. I want to scream, but I can't. I want to move, but I can't. I try with all my might, panting with the effort to turn over and throw off the being who is crushing and suffocating me. And I am powerless. Suddenly I wake up, panic-stricken, dripping with sweat, and light a candle. I am alone. After this struggle, which is repeated every night, I go to sleep at last, and sleep peacefully till dawn. June the 2nd. My condition is worse. What is the matter with me? The bromide and the showers are doing no good. June the 3rd. I've had a dreadful night. I'm going away for a week or 2. A little trip will no doubt do me good. July the 2nd. I'm home again. Cured. Moreover, I've had a delightful holiday. I went to Mont Saint-Michel, which I didn't know. What a marvellous view it is when one arrives at Avranches, as I did towards evening. The town is on a hill, and I drove to the public park on the edge of the city. I uttered a cry of amazement. There in front of me, as far as I could see, stretched an immensely wide bay. Its widely separated coasts disappeared in the misty distance, and in the centre of this vast bay, under a clear golden sky, rose the dark point of a strange rock in the middle of the sands. The sun had just set, and against the sky, still crimson, was silhouetted the outline of this fantastic rock, crowned with its fantastic abbey. At dawn the next morning I walked towards it. The tide was out, as it had been the evening before, and as I got nearer I saw the astonishing abbey rearing up before me. After several hours' walk, I reached the huge rock mass on which stands the little town dominated by the great church. When I reached the top, I said to the monk who was showing me round, "You must be very happy here, Father." He answered, "It's very windy, sir." We began to talk as we watched the tide rising, racing across the sands and covering them as with a steel breastplate. The monk told me an endless series of old stories and legends of the place. One of these impressed me greatly. Local people living on the rock insist that you can hear talking at night on the sands, followed by the bleating of two goats, one loud and one faint. Skeptics assert that it is only the cry of seabirds, which sometimes sounds like bleating, sometimes like human lamentations. But fishermen coming home late swear that between the two tides they have met an old shepherd wandering over the dunes near the isolated little town. His head is always hidden by his cloak, and he walks in front, leading a he-goat with a man's head and a nanny with a woman's. Both have long white hair and talk all the time, abusing each other in an unknown tongue, and then suddenly pausing to bleat with all their might. I said to the monk, "Do you believe this?" He murmured, "I don't know." I went on, "If there existed on Earth beings other than ourselves, surely we must have discovered them long ago. You and I must have seen them." He answered, "Can we see the 100,000th part of what exists? Take the wind, for example, the most powerful force in nature. It blows men over, knocks houses over, uproots trees, raises the sea into mountainous waves, destroys cliffs, and drives great ships onto reefs. It kills, whistles, moans, roars. Have you ever seen it? Can you ever see it? But it exists all the same." I had no answer to this obvious argument. The man was a philosopher, or perhaps a fool. I wasn't quite sure which, but I fell silent. I had often had the same thoughts. July the 3rd. I slept badly. There is certainly something here which makes me feverish, for my coachman suffers from the same trouble. When I got home yesterday, I noticed him looking pale, and I asked, "What is the matter with you, John?" "The fact is, I can't sleep, sir. It's the nights that get me down. Since you went away, sir, there's been some sort of spell on me." The other servants, however, are perfectly well, but I'm afraid of another attack myself. July the 4th. I'm certainly worse again. My old nightmares are back. Last night I felt as if someone was lying on top of me with his mouth on mine, draining my life away through my lips. Yes, he was sucking my life from my mouth like a leech. Presently he got up, satiated, and I woke up so bruised, so exhausted, so worn out that I couldn't move. Another day or two of this and I shall have to go away again. July the 5th. Is my reason going? What happened last night is so inexplicable that my brain is in a whirl when I think of it. I had locked my bedroom door, as I do now every night. Then, feeling thirsty, I drank half a glass of water, and I happened to notice that my carafe of water was full, right up to the crystal stopper. After that I went to bed and fell into one of my ghastly trances, out of which I was awakened some 2 hours later by a still more terrifying shock. Imagine a man being murdered in his sleep, waking up with a knife in his lungs and the death rattle in his throat, covered with blood, fighting for breath, at this last gasp, not knowing what has happened. Well, I was like that. Having at last recovered myself, I felt thirsty again. So I lit a candle and went to the table where my carafe stood. I picked it up and tilted it to fill my glass. No water came. It was empty. Absolutely empty. At first I didn't understand. Then I suddenly realized with such a shock that I had to sit down, or rather I collapsed onto a chair. A minute later I started up and looked all around, but immediately sat down again, dazed with amazement and terror in front of the transparent crystal. I gazed fixedly at it, searching for some explanation. My hands were shaking. Someone had drunk the water. Who? It must have been me, of course. It could have been no one else. So I must be a sleepwalker. Without knowing it, I must be living this mysterious double life which makes us wonder if there are two personalities in us, or if some alien being, unknown and invisible, enters into us while we are unconscious and controls our body, which must obey the intruder as it obeys us, only even more readily. No one can realize my ghastly agony of mind. No one can imagine the feelings of a man perfectly sane and wide awake, in possession of all his faculties, gazing in panic terror at an empty water bottle, from which a little water has disappeared while he was asleep. I stayed there till dawn, not daring to go back to bed. July the 6th. I am going mad. Someone has emptied my water bottle again tonight. Or rather, I must have drunk it myself. But is it really I? Is it? Who else could it be? My God, I'm going mad. Who can save me? July the 10th. I've just carried out several experiments with astonishing results. I must be mad. And yet, on July the 6th, before going to bed, I put on my table wine, milk, water, bread, and some strawberries. Someone, that is, I, drank all the water and some of the milk. Neither the wine nor the strawberries were touched. On July the 7th, I tried the same experiment with the same result. On July the 8th, I omitted the water and the milk, and nothing was touched. Finally, on July the 9th, I put on my table only water and milk, carefully wrapping the bottles in white muslin and tying down the stoppers. Then I rubbed my lips, my beard, and my hands with black lead, and went to bed. I fell into a deep sleep, followed presently by an agonizing awakening. I hadn't stirred. There was no black mark on my sheets. I hurried to the table. The wrappings round the bottles were not stained. I untied the string, shaking with fear. All the water and all the milk had been drunk. Oh my God! I must leave for Paris immediately. July the 12th. Paris. I must have lost my head these last few days. I must have been the victim of an overwrought imagination, unless I've been walking in my sleep, or under one of those influences observed but never explained called suggestion. Anyhow, my panic terror came very close to madness, and 24 hours in Paris have been enough to put me right. Yesterday, after some shopping and a round of visits which brought a breath of fresh air into my mind, I finished up the evening at the Comédie Française. They were playing a piece by the younger Alexandre Dumas, and his sprightly, penetrating wit has completed my cure. Certainly solitude is a dangerous thing for intelligent people who work. We need people around us who think and talk. When we are alone for a long period, we fill the void with fantasies. I was very cheerful as I made my way back to my hotel along the boulevard. In the midst of the bustling crowd, I smiled, not without irony, at my last week's terrors and imaginations, when I believed, yes, I really believed, that an invisible being was living under my roof. We are poor, weak creatures, easily frightened and upset, when we have to face some trivial incident which we cannot explain. Instead of drawing the obvious inference, I can't understand this because I don't know its cause, we immediately imagine some terrifying mystery or supernatural power at work. July the 30th. I've been back in my house a week. All is well. August the 2nd. No change. The weather is magnificent. I spend each day watching the Seine flow by. August the 6th. This time, I know I'm not mad. I've seen him. saw him with my own eyes. There's no doubt in my mind now. I saw him. My blood still runs cold. I can still feel the fear in my bones. I saw him. At about 2 this afternoon, with the sun blazing down, I was strolling through my rose beds, where the autumn roses are just beginning to show. I had paused to examine a variety of battle giant, which bore 3 magnificent blooms, when I clearly saw the stem of the nearest rose bend, as though an invisible hand had twisted it, and then snap, as though the hand had picked it. The flower ascended, following the trajectory which an arm would have needed to follow as it brought it close to a mouth, and then remained suspended in the clear air by itself, quite still, a ghastly blotch of red not 3 feet from where I stood. I made a frantic grab for it, but there was nothing there. It had disappeared. I immediately felt extremely angry with myself, for sane, serious-minded men such as myself do not have hallucinations like this. But was it a hallucination? I turned to see if I could locate the stem. It was there, of course, on the rose tree, freshly broken, between the 2 other roses which had remained on the branch. After that I walked back to the house, not knowing what to think. For I am now certain, as certain as I am that night follows day, that lurking somewhere around there is an invisible being which lives on milk and water, is able to touch things, pick them up, and move them around, a being who must therefore be endowed with some sort of material existence undetectable by human senses, and lives with me under my own roof. August the 7th. Had a peaceful night's sleep. He drank the water in the carafe, but did not disturb my sleep. I wonder if I've gone mad. Walking along the river bank in the bright sunshine a little while ago, I began having doubts about my sanity. Not the kind of vague doubts which I have had up to now, but specific, very real doubts. I have seen mad people. I have known some who were intelligent, lucid, even shrewd in all aspects of life, except one. They may be talking about any subject clearly, easily, and profoundly, when all of a sudden their train of thought founders on the reef of their folly and disintegrates, breaking up and sinking into the alarming, raging ocean fraught with surging waves, fogs, and sudden storms, which is known as insanity. August the 8th. Yesterday evening was horrible. He doesn't show himself any more, but I feel him near me, spying on me, watching, probing, dominating me. He's much more frightening when he keeps himself hidden like this than if he were to give notice of his constant, invisible presence by producing supernatural phenomena. Even so, I slept. August the 9th. Nothing, but I am afraid. August the 10th. Nothing. What will happen tomorrow? August the 11th. Still nothing. I can no longer remain in this house with these fears and thoughts rooted in my mind. I am going away. August the 12th, 10 o'clock at night. All day I've been trying to get away, but have not been able to manage it. I was quite determined to carry out a simple, uncomplicated act of free will, leave the house, get into my coach, and head for Rouen. But I couldn't do it. Why not? I have no strength left, no courage, no control over myself, not even the power to mobilize my will. I have lost the ability to will anything. But someone else is doing my willing for me, and I do what he says. August 14th. I am lost. Someone has taken over my mind and is controlling it. Someone is in command of all my actions, movements, and thoughts. I am nothing inside, merely a spectator, enslaved and terrified by everything I do. I decide to go out. I can't. He doesn't want to. So I remain where I am, helpless and shaking, sitting in the chair where he forces me to remain seated. All I want to do is stand up and get up out of the chair so that I might feel that I am my own master. But I can't. I'm rooted to my chair. The chair is rooted to the floor, and no power on earth could ever raise it or me. Then I have this sudden urge, an overpowering, imperious desire to go all the way down to the bottom of the garden, pick strawberries and eat them. So I go. I pick strawberries and eat them. God! God! Oh, God! Is there a God in heaven? If there is, deliver me, save me, help me, forgive me. Have pity, have mercy on me. I suffer agony, torture, and such horror. August the 15th. What sort of creature is it who has taken control of me? He is invisible, unknowable. Is he a roving member of some supernatural race? So there are such things as creatures who are invisible. Then why, since the beginning of the world, have they never ever shown themselves clearly to others, as they are now doing to me? I have never read anything which even remotely resembles what has been going on in my house. If only I could get out of here, go away, escape, and never return, I would be saved. But I cannot do it. August the 16th. I managed to escape today for a couple of hours, like a prisoner who finds that the door of his cell has been left unlocked by accident. I suddenly felt I was free, and that he was far away. I ordered the horses to be harnessed and reached Rouen. What a marvellous sensation it is to be able to say to a man, drive to Rouen, and see him obey. I got him to stop outside the library, where I asked to borrow the great treatise by Dr. Hermann Heresthaus on the unknown inhabitants of the ancient and modern worlds. Then, just as I was about to climb back into my carriage, I tried to say the station. But I shouted, not said, shouted, so loudly that people passing by turned round. Home! And I collapsed in panic and terror onto the upholstered seats of my carriage. He had found me and taken over again. August the 17th. What a night. What a terrible night. And yet, I feel as though I have something to cheer about. I managed to read until 1 in the morning. Hermann Heresthaus, Doctor of Philosophy and Theogony, is the author of a history of the manifestations of all the invisible beings who have ever haunted man or been imagined by man. He describes their origin, their domain, and their powers. But not one of them is anything like the being who haunts me. It is as if men, from the moment they began to think, have always sensed the presence of a new kind of being whom they have feared, stronger than they are, who will one day be their successor in this world, and aware that this superior being is near, but unable to define its nature. They have created in their terror a whole host of occult beings and hazy phantoms, which are born of fear. So, having read until 1 in the morning, I sat by my open window to cool my head and my thoughts in the gentle breeze which blew out of the darkness. It was very fine and pleasantly warm. There was a time when I loved such nights. Presently I dozed off. When I had been asleep for perhaps 40 minutes, I opened my eyes without moving, having been awoken by some kind of vague, rather peculiar sensation. At first I couldn't see anything, but all of a sudden I had this feeling that a page of the book I had left open on my table had turned over by itself. No breath of wind had come in from the window. Surprised, I sat and waited. After about 4 minutes, I really saw with my very own eyes another page rise and then settle back onto the previous one, exactly as if a hand had turned it. My reading chair was empty, or at least it looked empty, but I knew that he was sitting there, sitting in my seat, reading. I leapt up angrily, like a wild animal about to turn on its trainer and tear him to pieces, and rushed across the room, intending to grab him, strangle him, kill him. But before I could get there, my chair tipped over as if its occupant had got up to avoid me. My table rocked, my lamp fell over and went out, and my window closed, as though a burglar I had disturbed had escaped into the night, banging it shut as he went. So he had run away. He had been afraid of me. It means that tomorrow, some other time, one of these days, I will be able to grab him with both hands and smash him to the ground. After all, dogs sometimes bite their masters. Don't they go for the throat? August the 18th. I've spent the day thinking. I shall certainly obey him to the letter, follow his whims, do whatever he wants. I shall be humble, meek, abject. He may be stronger than I am, but there will come a time. August the 19th. Now I know everything. Everything. I have just read the following in the World Scientific Review. A rather curious report has just reached us from Rio de Janeiro. An outbreak, or rather an epidemic of madness, not unlike the contagious collective insanity which attacked the peoples of Europe in the Middle Ages, is currently raging in the province of São Paulo. People are frantically leaving their homes, deserting their villages, and abandoning their crops, claiming that they are being controlled, possessed, and herded like so many human cattle by beings who are invisible but not intangible, a kind of vampire which feeds on their life forces while they sleep, but also drinks water and milk, though it does not appear to take nourishment of any other kind. Professor Don Pedro Enriquez, accompanied by a team of medical experts, has left for São Paulo province. His purpose is to conduct a field study of the causes and symptoms of this extraordinary outbreak of hysteria, and to recommend to the Emperor measures which, in his view, will prove most effective in restoring the sanity of the distraught population. Of course! Now I remember that magnificent Brazilian three-master which sailed past my house as it was being towed up the Seine on the 8th of May last. I thought she was so handsome and sparkling and gay. The thing must have been on board. It had come from over the sea, far away, where its kind originates, and it saw me. And it must have leapt ashore off the ship. Oh, God! Now I know. I understand. Man's reign on earth is over. The thing is here, the one so feared by early peoples in their primitive terrors, the one whom anxious priests fought with exorcisms, the one whom sorcerers summoned at dead of night but never did see, the one whom men with second sight, sensing the existence of these elusive masters of the world, clothed in grotesque or pleasant shapes in the form of goblins, ghosts, jinns, fairies, and sprites. Then, after these crude inventions, which were a product of the terror-stricken minds of our first ancestors, came clearer-sighted men who detected his presence more clearly. Mesmer realized the truth, and in the last 10 years medical science has discovered in precise terms the nature of his power, long before he came finally to use it himself. Doctors have toyed with the principal weapon in our new Lord's armory, the power of a mysterious force of will over the enslaved human mind. They call it magnetism, hypnotism, suggestion, and other names besides. I have seen them playing with this ghastly force like unsuspecting children. Woe betide us, mankind is doomed. He is here with us. What is his name? I seem to hear him crying his name, but I can't quite catch... Yes! He's shouting his name. I listen, but I can't. Say it again. The Horla. I hear it distinctly now. The Horla. He is the Horla. And he has come. From the beginning, the vulture has eaten the dove. The wolf has eaten the lamb. The lion has devoured the sharp-horned buffalo. Man has slain the lion with arrow, sword, and gun. But the Horla will use man as we have used the horse and the ox. He will make us his chattel, his slave, and his food by using nothing more than the power of his will. Woe betide us. Yet, sometimes, an animal will turn and kill its master. I, too, would like... And I know I can. But first, I shall need to know what he is like. To touch him and see him. Scientists say that the eyes of animals are not the same as ours, and they do not see as we do. My eyes cannot see the interloper who holds me in bondage. Why can't I? Wait a moment. I remember now what the monk told me that day on the Mont Saint-Michel. Are we able to see 100,000th part of what exists? Look, the wind's getting up. Wind is the greatest natural force there is. It blows men off their feet, demolishes buildings, uproots trees, whips the sea into mountains of water, destroys cliffs, and drives great ships onto the rocks. It kills and shrieks and moans and roars. Have you ever seen it? Can you see it? And yet it exists all right. Then I thought, my eye is so weak and imperfect that it cannot even see solid objects when they are transparent, like glass. If a sheet of unsilvered glass bars my way, I blunder into it, just as a bird that has got into a room hurls itself against the panes of the window. And there are a great many other things, too, which deceive and mislead the eye.
Is it at all surprising, then, that it is unable to perceive a new kind of object through which light passes?
What's got into me? It's him. It's the Horla haunting me, forcing me to think these crazy things. He's got inside me. He's taking possession of my soul. I'll kill him.
August the 19th.
I shall kill him. I've seen him.
Yesterday evening I sat down at my desk and pretended to be completely absorbed in what I was writing. Of course I knew he'd come prowling around, close, so close that perhaps I'd be able to touch him, even grab hold of him. And what if I managed to? I'd have the strength of desperation. I'd use everything, hands, legs, chest, head, teeth, to strangle and crush and bite and smash him to pieces. I waited and watched with every sense on full alert. I had lit both lamps and the 8 candles on the mantelpiece, hoping that it would be bright enough for me to see him. Facing me was my bed, an old oak 4-poster. On the right, my fireplace. On the left, my door, which I had carefully closed after leaving it open for long enough to attract his attention. At my back was a very tall wardrobe, with a full mirror front, which I use each morning for shaving and dressing, and in which I normally glance at myself from head to foot every time I walk past. So I was sitting there, pretending to write to allay his suspicions, for he too was watching me. Then, all at once, I sensed that he was there, reading over my shoulder, almost touching my ear. I leapt up with my arms out and turned round so quickly that I almost fell over, and then it was as bright as day, but I could not see myself in my mirror. It was empty, very bright, bursting with light, but my reflection was not there, and I was standing directly in front of it. I could see the tall, clear glass from top to bottom. I stared at it in a panic, not daring to step forward, not daring to move, while all the time I sensed that he was there, and that he had gobbled up my reflection. I knew he would escape me yet again. I was absolutely terrified. And then, all at once, in the depths of the mirror, I began to see myself through a mist, a swirling mist, as though I were looking through the ripples of a lake, and I had the impression of water slowly surging from left to right, so that my reflection became clearer by the second. It was like the end of an eclipse. Whatever was hiding me did not have any well-defined shape, but a kind of opaque transparency which grew fainter and fainter. Eventually, I was able to see all of myself as I do every day when I look in the mirror. I had seen him. The fear has stayed with me, and I am still shaking. August the 20th.
How am I to kill him, since I can't get to him? Poison? No. He'd see me putting it in the water. In any case, would the poisons we have be effective against his invisible body? No, definitely no. But then how? How? August the 21st. I sent for a locksmith from Rouen and ordered metal shutters for my bedroom, the kind that private houses in Paris sometimes have on the ground floor as a precaution against burglars. I've also got him to make me a door to match. I've as good as said I am a coward, but I don't care. September the 10th. Hotel Continental, Rouen. It's done. Done. But is he dead? My mind is still spinning after what I've seen. Yesterday, after the locksmith had finished installing my shutters and my steel door, I left everything wide open until midnight, even though it was beginning to get cold. Suddenly, I felt that he was there, and I was filled with a wild sense of exultation. I stood up slowly and walked this way and that for some time to throw him off the scent. Then I took off my boots and casually put on my slippers. Next I closed the metal shutters, and crossing the room unhurriedly also closed the door, which I double-locked. Returning to the window, I padlocked it and put the key in my pocket. All of a sudden I sensed that he was circling me nervously, that he was also afraid, and that he was willing me to let him out. I almost gave in to him, but I didn't. Then, standing with my back against the door, I opened it a little way, just wide enough to allow me to back out through it, and since I'm quite tall, my head touched the lintel. I was convinced he couldn't possibly have got out, so I locked him in by himself and left him there all alone. I exulted. I had him. I ran down the stairs, went into my drawing room, which is directly underneath my bedroom, took both my lamps and emptied all the oil onto the carpet, over the furniture, over everything. I put a match to it, and then got out of the house fast, double-locking the great front door behind me. I went and hid at the bottom of the garden in a clump of laurel bushes. What a time it took! Everything was pitch black, quiet and still, not a breath of wind, not one star, but mountains of invisible clouds which lay heavy upon me and crushed me beneath their weight. I kept watching the house, and I waited on. What an unconscionable time it was taking! I was starting to think that the fire had gone out by itself, or that he had put it out, when one of the ground-floor windows shattered under the force of the heat, and a tongue of flame, a great red and yellow, tall, languid, licking tongue of flame, shot up the white wall and caressed it as it climbed to the roof. Shafts of light ran through the trees, over branches and leaves, and with them came a shudder of fear, too. The birds awoke. A dog began to howl. It felt as though day were about to break. Almost immediately, another 2 windows shattered, and I saw that the whole of the ground floor of my house was a blazing inferno. But then a scream. A horrible, high-pitched, blood-curdling scream echoed in the night air, and 2 attic windows were flung open. I had forgotten all about the servants. I could see their frenzied faces and their arms waving wildly. Frantic with horror, I began running towards the village, bellowing, "Help! Help! Fire! Fire!" As I ran, I met people who were already on their way, and I went back with them to watch. By this time the house was nothing but a ghastly, magnificent bonfire, a monstrous blazing heap which lit up the ground all around, a funeral pyre, which was even then roasting the bodies of men, but also consuming him, my prisoner, the new being, the new master, the Horla. Suddenly, the whole roof collapsed inwards, and a volcano of flames leapt high into the sky. Through all the gutted windows that opened into the furnace, I could see a cauldron of fire, and I thought that he was there, in that blazing inferno, dead. Dead. But perhaps... or what if he were not dead? But surely his body... But if light could pass through his body, was his body not indestructibly immune to the methods used to destroy ours? What if he were not dead? Perhaps only time has any power over the invisible, deadly Lord. Why should he be given a transparent, unknowable body, a body made of spiritual matter, if, like us, he was going to have to fear pain, injury, infirmity, and premature death? Premature death! It is the cause of every human fear. After man, the hurler! After man, who may die any day, at any hour, at any moment, of accidents of every kind, has come he who will never die before his time, before the appointed hour, before the fixed moment, but only when he reaches the end of his natural life. No! No! There is not, nor can there be any doubt. He is not dead. Given that this is so, I shall obviously have no choice but to kill myself.